I love myself a game that makes you feel incredibly skilled without demanding the most outrageous things from you as a player. Rhythm games lend themselves to this very well. Doing something at the right time, especially when it syncs up with the energetic music, is always unbelievably satisfying, and Metal Hellsinger is able to deliver that while also not staying as rigid as other rhythm games, including other shooters like BPM. The first thing about this game is that it's on Game Pass and has demos on all platforms it's available on, so if you think it looks cool but maybe isn't your cup of tea, you never got into rhythm stuff, you're not into metal, anything that puts you on the fence, do yourself a favor and just download this thing and try it. I'm not the biggest fan of metal music either, it's just not my thing, but that didn't stop me from becoming completely entranced by this soundtrack. This game is made with a lot of love, it's brilliantly executed, and it isn't a massive time sink if you don't want it to be. It's just one of those games that I think everyone should give a chance as long as they're interested in at least one genre it covers. But enough talking in generalizations, let's talk about the specifics here. Metal Hellsinger is a game where you blast demons in the face to blood-pumping metal music with a visualized metronome encouraging you to time your hits to the tempo of the music in order to do extra damage, keep your combo up, and enter a higher range for your multiplier. One thing that it does which I find really helps ease you into the flow of things and doesn't hinder you if you're not all that great at rhythm games is it lets you shoot off beat as much as you want. It makes it feel like there's no punishment for being off beat, there's just a reward for being on beat. It is a pretty substantial reward for those looking to clear out rooms faster and get higher on the leaderboards though, and that means you're always being encouraged to play well without being stopped in your tracks if you get out of sync for a bit. Speaking of the leaderboards also, I just wanted to toss in there that at one point I was top 15 in the whole world in one of the levels of Metal Hellsinger. You know, whatever, it's really light work for me. Now, was that because only a few dozen people had the game? I guess we'll never know that the answer to that question is yes. The point is, I can officially say that I used to be top 15 worldwide in Metal Hellsinger, and no one can outright deny that statement. The way the rhythm elements work in the game are very similar to Pistol Whip if you played that, but crucially this is very different to the aforementioned BPM, which would only allow you to fire shots, reload, and dodge if you were on beat. While BPM is a very fun game, that system wasn't really beginner friendly, and even if you were decent at it, if you did mistime a shot, you felt a deflating loss of momentum that would affect the flow of combat. Metal Hellsinger doesn't suffer from this problem as much. If you mistime a few shots here and there, it might not be fun seeing your combo disappear, but you don't feel like you fell off the horse. And even though actions like reloading feel great when you do hit them on beat, there is an active reload that speeds things up and gets you into the combat a bit quicker. It still happens automatically no matter what, it just takes longer. Absolutely none of this leniency affects how infectious the rhythm of the game is though. I was so into it that sometimes I'd go through menus with the same tempo, and almost uncontrollably I would only time weapon swapping to the beat as well, even though there was no benefit to that. In fact, it would have been better to swap them faster. I just got so pulled into the song that I couldn't help it. There's a lot of direct score-related reasons to play well, of course, how much you stay on beat, how many kills you got on beat, your longest hit streak, how fast you finish the level, headshots, slaughters, which are effectively glory kills, and multi-kills all give you score bumps while damage taken brings it down, but the satisfying nature of the game alone is enough to get you to push yourself. It really just doesn't feel the same when you're not giving it your all. For example, for whatever reason, I couldn't find the right tempo for the last song. I feel like I'd been doing pretty well until then, getting combos of 30 to 50 somewhat frequently and staying in that times 16 range for 70% of levels, but parts of the final song just got away from me and I kept mistiming it and it felt horrible. I'm not gonna lie, part of me thinks the tempo of the visualizer in the final level didn't match the tempo of the song because it was such a sudden issue, but I also fell pretty low on the leaderboard on that one, so I think I just had a tough time with it. It wasn't the game's fault necessarily. The point being that when you are struggling to match the beat for long periods of time, the game gets far worse than when you're perfectly in tune with it, so you're always trying to stay on course just to have more fun. The dynamism of the music should also be given a lot of credit here. Not only do songs extend or transition at different times depending on how long you take in any given encounter, meaning it needs to seamlessly patch together parts of the song depending on the player's actions, but the higher your multiplier gets, the more the music swells and builds to the point that you can feel your success outside of just a small counter at the top. It winds up affecting the entire soundscape of the game, which is honestly brilliant. Once you hit the higher end of the times 8 multiplier, you hear faint vocals start to peek in, and hitting times 16, the max multiplier, fully unleashes the vocals, which are sometimes more melodic and grand or just go full on screamo. The performances from these vocalists are insane and bring so much energy, and even as somebody who, like I said, isn't really into metal music, I'd be gunning for that times 16, not just because I'm a tryhard, which fun fact, I am, but I also just wanted to hear that music in its full glory. I'm sure people are gonna mod this game and add a bunch of bangers too. I'd go nutty on Loaded Diaper. I wouldn't rest till I was #1 in the world. Somebody please make that happen. The way the music builds gives the impression that you're not just matching the song, you're almost creating it yourself through demon slaughter, which is a crazy sentence and really establishes this game as a massive power fantasy. The only time that I was pulled out of the game was this moment where a demon was sort of stuck in the terrain somewhere, which meant that I couldn't kill him and couldn't progress. That wasn't ideal, but luckily the levels aren't too long. Still, that would have been a shame if I was in the middle of a really good run, so I wanted to mention it. The combat in this game might not be as complicated or strategic as a game like Doom, specifically Eternal, but it fuels you in a very similar way. You only ever have a few weapons at a time, one of which allows you to maintain your combo without needing to hit an enemy, which is very helpful and adds structure and purpose to the short in-between sections. And the others include a shotgun, dual pistols, and dual boomerangs. Each weapon has different advantages and different supers which activate after you use it in combat enough, and these are more creative than your average bigger version of the shot you already have kind of supers, although one of them is literally just that. The skull rains down a debilitating lightning attack, the bird boomerang thing summons a storm around you, and the pistol set up a whole duplicate of yourself to help you in combat for a while. It's kind of up to personal preference what you decide to go with for each level. I never abandoned the shotgun, for example, and while it would have been nice to have a few more weapons to choose from, these more than get the job done, and weapon variety isn't really the focus to begin with. I wouldn't say the level design is anything exceptional, but it's not a hindrance, and I'd say the same thing for the enemies. This is still a small team at the end of the day, so I don't mind that there's a somewhat similar structure to each level, although there are some cool layouts here and there. And I also don't mind that there's only 10 non-boss enemies, with 3 being variants, but I wouldn't say this is something that the game does particularly well. The bright side is the art style that this game boasts is stellar and also feels like it's clearly echoing Doom with a slightly more aggressive version of zombies and other enemies that don't feel far from soldiers, archviles, hell knights, and maker drones. It doesn't feel like a cheap knockoff, but I think it's more than fair to say there's a clear inspiration here, and as a fan of that franchise, it's nice to have something that matches its spirit and presentation. While some enemies are kind of annoying to deal with, overall it's a solid bunch of goons to fight with a simple but engaging combat system. Something I'm a bit more critical of though is the design of the boss, and yes, I said boss singular. When I played the demo of this game, I was really into the way the boss of that level operated. It was very reminiscent of Returnal with patterns of bullets being chucked at you, and occasionally you'd break to fight some normal enemies in between. While I have been critical of ads or additional enemies and boss fights in the past, I did mention that I'd give them a pass if they are useful to the player in some way and not just a cheap distraction, and in this case they do help build your combo and act as a means to heal yourself if you slaughter them, so it is acceptable. The issue is, this boss is the boss of every single level in the game outside of the final stage. Dude just took L after L. The narrator even outright said the same thing.
Unaccustomed to taking the big L.
They're each meant to be aspects of the final boss, so technically they are different, but definitely not in design or concept. There are little changes introduced to each fight. It'll have a brick shield or a duplicate, although other times it doesn't seem to have much of a difference outside of the pattern of bullets that are sent your way, and I gotta say, that's kinda disappointing. It's a fine design for a boss, but it gets pretty overused by the end, and I would have liked to see more demonic designs with a different fight structure. Every single one of them came down to shoot this thing for a while, then kill a bunch of regular enemies, then shoot this thing for a while, rinse repeat until you win. I won't spoil the final boss, but its design was incredible, clearly inspired by the icon of sin, and felt less random in its attacks, which made me wish even more for a better variety throughout the game. Again, I get it's a small team, but this time around it felt like it had more of a negative effect on the experience. It also doesn't help that in later stages, the boss's attacks feel screen-wide and really random and hard to decipher, to the point that I was just tanking hits. Even on the second, third tries on some of these levels, I was like, how do I avoid this stuff and still do damage? Of course, I could have just stayed back entirely during these attacks, but since the game has incentives to keep attacking without letting up, and sitting back spamming the skull to keep my combo up felt kind of cowardly, I didn't want to back off, and usually I got punished pretty hard for it. I only died a few times though, and never fully. The game gives you a few resurrections on standard difficulty, but after this review I'll likely step into hard mode and get my ass whooped. Generally I prefer the non-boss parts of the levels a lot more than the boss fights, which is a shame because I felt like there was a lot of potential in rhythm bullet hell FPS bosses. It just wasn't executed on here. Still, this is what I would call the only outright negative part of the game in my opinion. At the beginning of each stage you're treated to a short cutscene and a bit of narration from the skull that you pick up at the beginning, and these have a very interesting style that hammer home the epic tale of hate and revenge very well. The story isn't exactly an all-time great, it's very stripped down and just sort of follows a voiceless protagonist tirade through hell. It's not going to be winning any awards or anything, but aesthetically it sort of ties the whole experience together, and this depiction of hell with characters like the Judge and the Unknown makes it feel like despite how little we see of it, the world is actually fairly fleshed out behind the scenes. This stuff always sets the stage for a level very well, and I always appreciate a nice visual change-up for cutscenes in a game. It makes it feel like a comic come to life. All of Metal Hellsinger's 9 levels, one for each layer of hell, are around 10 to 20 minutes long, which makes this game actually quite short if you're thinking of it as a linear experience. That's not really what the game is though, as it not only makes each level easily replayable and encourages you to increase your high score, but it also includes challenges for each song where you have to do something like slaughter 25 enemies in a small time frame, which gives you helpful sigils that you can equip for your next run and help boost your scores. Even the sigils have a little bit of lore to them, and these challenges along with the short length of levels and emphasis on music gives the game a very high replay value. I was already going back and replaying levels a few times before I'd even finished the game to begin with. It felt like a great mix of linear game design and more arcadey features, which is exactly what this game needed to be. It didn't overstay its welcome, it didn't stretch its ideas too thin or compromise the quality of the songs for a higher volume of them. It just gets in and gets out, letting you come back to it as much as you may want. It may be slightly lacking in weapon and enemy variety and sorely lacking in boss variety, but everything else it does leads to an addictive power fantasy that's hard to put down. This is a game that truly needs to be experienced to fully grasp why it's enjoyable, so my suggestion to you is if you have Game Pass, give it a go right away. If you don't have Game Pass, try out the demo on PC, PS5, and Xbox Series. Hopefully that demo is still there post-launch. There's no reason for you to not try this out. Give it a shot, and if you're a fan of shooters, especially Doom, you probably won't regret it. If you're new here, consider subscribing. The links to my Discord and Patreon are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, leave it a like, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.